Of JudgeStone. This is going to be our weekly Hearthstone-related talk show from Judgment Gaming. So, to kick things off, we'll just do a quick round of introductions. I am Justice, the founder of Judgment Gaming. I've been playing Hearthstone for a long time, actually covered the game and its professional scene as my job. I was very fortunate, got to do that for 2 years. And now, mainly focusing on content for Judgment Gaming. I am joined by a man who has been playing card games for longer than I've known him, and that is a long time. He is the winner of the inaugural JDG show match. I am joined by, of course, Owen. How are you doing today?
Yeah, it's been great so far.
All right, nice. And also here, we have a man who's been working on creating card games longer than you've been playing them. And he's the newest member of Judgment Gaming, so welcome to the team. And I will, with that, turn things over to our host, Shinfitz.
Yes, very nice. Welcome, guys. So what I wanted to do is go over a couple different topics. First and foremost, I think it would be... I don't think it would be responsible of us if we didn't kind of address the Druid situation. The Druid deck in Druid of JudgeStone that you play on your Druid device.
On my Druid 7.
Exactly, precisely. So basically, what are you guys' thoughts on Druid just destroying everything, pretty much? Let's start with Jeremy.
Yeah, so I think that it's an issue that is well documented now within the Hearthstone community, so I don't think we really need to spend our time going over what the problem is. We know that Druid is displaying a power level that is basically unhealthy for the game. We know that when you queue up for a match on ladder, particularly if you're at a higher rank, your chances of playing against a Druid are significantly better than playing against any other class. We know that specifically Jade Druid is a real issue. So I think rather than going over exactly what the problem is, we know the problem. We know that they ramp too hard. We know that ramping into Ultimate Infestation is a problem. So I think maybe it would be more prudent of us to talk about what exactly makes it so frustrating, and I think what that is, and it's funny because if you watch even professional streamers, the intense reaction they have to having Ultimate Infestation played against them while they have 4 mana crystals is both amusing and also shows you what the real problem is. These are guys that play the game day in, day out, and it's still, holy crap, I had 5 mana, 4 mana, whatever, and he just Ultimate Infestation me, and, well, I guess that's it, I guess he outplayed me. And I think that's where the frustration comes from in part. And then, of course, we have the fact that typically you beat Jade Druid by swarming them, playing a lot of cheap early minions, maybe buff them if you can, and, just go wide on the board, because Druid typically couldn't really deal with that. And then they got Spreading Plague, which completely shuts down that strategy. And again, given how hard they ramp, it might be a 5 mana card, but by the time you've gotten 3 minions on the board, chances are better than not that they can Spreading Plague you and just stall long enough to do Jade Druid things.
Yeah, Owen, I know that you mentioned that Spreading Plague was one of the biggest problems with the Druid deck. What do you think about that? Or what are your thoughts on that in particular?
I think that's really the biggest issue, because I feel that, well, first and foremost, it's no secret that Druid ramps hard. That's kind of the core class identity that they have. It's their thing. And so, of course, like Ultimate Infestation, if you had taken that card out and plugged it into any other class, there's no chance it would have been as big of a problem as it was. There's no other class in the game that can take advantage of that particular card as well as it is. But I think that kind of proves the point that it's not really a problem with Ultimate Infestation specifically. It's more a problem with the ramping aspect of the class. But what I think is a huge thing is that even if you allow Druid to do the ramping and to have the Ultimate Infestation, I think it would be a much more manageable threat. if the deck was still vulnerable to mid-range and aggressive strategies. And I think that Spreading Plague just produces too high of a barrier for those decks to overcome and then still have enough resources to close out the game. For 5 mana, the card's often, healing you effectively or gaining you effectively armor, sometimes 15, 20 points. Because 5 health is just a really critical breakpoint. There aren't very many ways to clear a bunch of 5 health minions effectively and still preserve your own board at the same time. So I think that Spreading Plague is definitely one of the biggest reasons I think that we're seeing such a problem with Druid, because it effectively, slammed the door on the one natural predator that the deck had. And so, or some of the few natural predators the deck had anyways. And so now we're in a situation where the only deck that has a positive matchup against Jade Druid is another Druid deck, which is Token Druid. And the only reason it has a positive matchup is because the deck is fast enough to actually produce enough threats to kill them before they get to hit their Spreading Plague.
So, although I don't really think this will solve any issue, but what do we think the issue was with Druid in particular? Like, was Druid really in a place where they needed to be buffed this much prior to Frozen Throne, or was this just like a design mistake by the creators? What do you think, Jeremy, or Justice rather?
I think that's actually kind of the point, is that Druid has historically always been one of the stronger classes in the game, largely because of cards like Innervate and Wild Growth, which just allow it to do things other classes can't do. But people have short-term memory, and some people forget that before this there was Yogg Druid or Malygos Druid, which was still at worst a tier 2 deck. And then before that we had Combo Druid, which was a tier 1 deck. Like, Druid has always been strong, and the thing is that it wasn't as crazy in the Ungoro meta. Jade Druid was a strong deck in certain matchups, and that was fine. It was a niche deck. It served as control killer, and that's okay. Yeah, it felt bad to queue up as a control deck against Jade Druid before, but you just understood that, in that environment where certain types of decks will beat other types of decks, Jade Druid served to beat control decks, but overall did not have a great win rate because it was vulnerable to other strategies. So when you take a deck that does one thing very well, which is late game, and is basically unbeatable late game, if you go late enough, but then give it so many ways to get to that late game unhindered. Again, we see Mire Keeper in the list, which wasn't there before. Why? Because now you have Ultimate Infestation. We see Nourish being played to gain crystals now almost all the time, whereas before it was used mainly as a draw spell. Why? Because you have Ultimate Infestation. So you give the deck that already had crazy late game the ability to just say, I'm going to use all my resources to get to 10 mana. Well, you have 5, and then I'm going to play this card that is going to make that all a moot point, because now I just get to refill my hand. Because that was the trade-off before. If you really wanted to ramp that hard, if you wanted to Nourish for crystals, if you wanted a Mire Keeper for crystals, you ran out of resources. So now you have 10 mana while your opponent has 5, but now you're basically in top deck mode, and that was kind of where Big Druid almost came in, was where they would ramp really hard and then try to just drop like one big threat a turn. Ultimate Infestation says, go ahead and use all your resources to ramp, because you're just going to refill your hand right afterwards. And then, as we talk about, Spreading Plague allows them to stave off aggro. It's these tools that gave a deck that plays just for late game too many ways to get to late game unscathed. So you took a class that was already in a decent spot, and Token Druid, mind you, was also still a deck in Ungoro. It's not like that deck just came about because of Knights of the Frozen Throne. It was already a decent deck in Ungoro. It just got better. When you have things like Crypt Lord, which basically serves a purpose of Tar Creeper, but better, which is it's not there to destroy your opponent's minions, it's there to prevent your minions from being destroyed. So that while you're buffing the hell out of your minions, your opponent can't get to them because it's got this huge, 1/9 taunt in the way. So they gave tools to a class that already had decks that were working in certain situations, and made them able to work in almost every situation. And so, yeah, I think that was a mistake.
Well, Owen, I know we had this conversation earlier where we spoke about, or we kind of touched on, what do we think we could do to combat Druid? And I brought up that Brian Kibler, am I saying that name right? Kibler?
Kibler, yeah.
Kibler?
Yes.
Not the Keebler elf, no.
Not the Keebler elf, okay. But we spoke about how I think he went like 0-4 or 0-5 against all Druids with his Warlock deck. And while I don't really think that's an answer to the deck, because I think he's just that good of a player, is there anything that someone else could be playing to kind of stave off Druid other than Druid?
Well, I think that's part of the problem in the metagame right now, is that you see that the deck is the reason that it's becoming a problem is not just the percentage of play that it sees, but the fact that by its very presence, it suppresses so many other decks that otherwise would be seeing play or would be experimented with. And part of that is from the incredible late game. As far as decks that we see that are effective against it that aren't Druid, traditionally Murloc Paladin had a positive win rate against it. However, we've seen since the metagame has started to mature a bit that win rate has dropped closer to a 50% match rate. But the sad thing about the situation that we have right now is that even at 50%, that's considered a fair win, okay win rate against the deck, because pretty much no one else can muster such a thing. So Murloc Paladin is certainly a decent way to tackle that. We do know that the Razakis Priest deck is not a terrible option, depending on the sequence of it, of its draws. But again, it's kind of plagued by the inconsistency that those singleton decks tend to have. And so I think that Druid is just in a spot right now where it has the ability to defeat the aggressive decks that had traditionally kept it in check, and the tools that exist now to defeat its long game plan of using Jade Idol and cycling it over and over again, the tools are not effective enough to keep it in check before it just overwhelms you. So, we've seen some pro players have success here and there. I've seen Tice play a Millrogue deck and beat Jade Druid, but I think the problem is that even when you have some of the best players in the world tackling this problem, the best that they can come up with is decks that have close to 50% win rates. And I think that that's not really a great place to be. If the best decks that you can find that aren't Druid, approach 50% but can't get past that.
Right. Okay, I actually have a question for both of you. So if we were to take Druid out of the picture totally, let's just say you hit the delete button, is the game better? Like, is the metagame, maybe is there a rock, paper, scissors environment without the Druid deck? What do you guys think?
So it's an interesting question, and my answer to that is why I think the Knights of the Frozen Throne meta is actually maybe slightly even unhealthier than people realize, because we're so focused on Druid, is the decks that people are playing after that are things like Quest Mage, which was originally intended to be a Jade Druid counter, but similar to Murloc Paladin, that win rate is not as good anymore, as Jade Druid players have started realizing that they were playing that matchup wrong, and that kind of partially led to the win percentages. They were so used to playing for late game that they were using removal on minions they didn't need to. They weren't playing as aggressively enough, and as they've started to figure that out, the win rate has started to balance. But you look at something like Quest Mage, which is a deck that, for the health of the game, should never be a tier 1 deck. I'm not saying that it is right now, but I'm saying it shouldn't be, because any deck that basically says, I have infinite damage, and if you didn't kill me by, turn 7, turn 8, it doesn't matter what you did, I win. Like, the Quest Mage is something that I'm fine with it existing. I'm fine with it being like a tier 3, maybe low tier 2. It should never be a tier 1 deck that just everyone is playing all the time to win, because it's not the most fun thing to play against. You look at something like Big Priest, for example, ton of fun to play when you win with it. But it is the kind of deck that sometimes you just go, well, my opponent had Barnes on turn 4, so I lost. Like, that is just the way that the deck can play out. And obviously there's a lot more to it that is oversimplifying it, but there are games where it just comes down to that. And I think that in a healthier metagame, like we look at Ungoro, like you just said, you look at Jade Druid, and sometimes, by turn 4 you feel like, wow, they're just so far ahead of me, there's nothing I can do. if you look at something like Big Priest, sometimes the turn 4 Barnes is just, turn 4 Barnes, coin Barnes into Eternal Servitude, into Shadow Essence, into another Eternal Servitude. And it's just like something that feels like there's nothing you can do against that deck, which again isn't always bad. I'm not saying it's bad for that deck to exist, but I'm saying that if you look at the decks that are being played a lot, and then look at what's going to fill the void of Jade Druid, they're not always the most interactive of decks, and there's just a lot of if we take that out and this is what we're left with, it still, I think, pales in comparison to the Ungoro meta, just in terms of deck variance. And a lot of classes only have like one deck that they can play, whereas before we were seeing, with the exception of say Hunter or maybe Warlock, every class pretty much had multiple ways they could go, and we're not really seeing that as much now. So I think it is a sign that the meta we're in, maybe in certain ways, like there's things we can play now that we couldn't play before, so that's cool, and like experimenting with new stuff is always fun, and I like to do that. But I think when you look at the end of the day of what the most competitive decks are and where we are without Druid, it's still Knights of the Frozen Throne, I think, doesn't really compare very favorably to where we were in Ungoro.
How do you feel about that, Owen? Same thing, even with the introduction with the new Death Knights and things of that nature? Do you feel the same way?
Yes and no. I mean, I agree in principle that the game would be worse off without it, because Jade Druid does serve an important part of the meta in that it does, create a check to what would otherwise be unchecked control strategies. So I think it's important to have that around. But what I disagree with is that I don't think that, like, we snap our fingers and we eliminate Jade Druid as a deck, that the meta is as bleak as Justice might be painting it. I feel that almost assuredly there are some really unhealthy decks in the game that exist right now that would be really problematic if they went unchecked. But I feel like the decks that he's referring to, the Quest Mage deck and the Big Priest deck, I think those are decks that are already punished by the aggressive strategies that Jade Druid is also keeping suppressed. And I feel that without the presence of a spreading plague, every 4 out of 10 games, that those decks would thrive a bit better, and they would keep those kind of elements of the metagame in check. What I think that it would do is it would allow for more experimentation, for more interesting controlling strategies, as I do feel that while it's important to have a check to control, that I feel that the check of Jade Druid is a bit too overwhelming and is inhibiting those kind of strategies from appearing. For instance, is we're in an interesting point in the meta right now where Shaman has access to an unprecedented number of ancestral visions or ancestral spirit effects that it could potentially pile up onto big taunting creatures. That once upon a time was a controlling Shaman strategy that saw play, and I think that now it has tools. It would have the tools to kind of do an interesting iteration of that. But because Jade Druid is such an effective control killer, the deck is simply too slow and doesn't have the oomph it would need to actually close out a game. And so I feel that without Jade Druid around, we would see more experimentation. And I'm not saying that those decks would become like super high tier, but I think that other decks would appear that would diversify the meta beyond what it is today.
So here's my question to you, and I'm not saying that it is or isn't. If we eliminate Jade Druid, do we finally arrived at the mythical Hearthstone control meta?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Just checking.
Mostly because I think that I don't think that Hearthstone will ever really arrive to that game state. I think that the cycle of the way that the releases come kind of incentivize the game to kind of swing back and forth on that pendulum of aggressive and slow decks. And the natural state of the way the ladder works out also kind of incentivizes that swing back and forth. But I think that principally Hearthstone's kind of a very tempo-oriented game, just like from a core gameplay perspective. And so I think that if you do things to the card pool that encourage a controlling metagame, I think that you arrive at an unhealthy metagame. Mm-hmm. And I honestly think that we're kind of there. Like, nobody wants to admit it, but Jade Druid is a control deck at the end of the day. It's a proactive one, but a control deck nonetheless. We're at the control meta, guys. We've arrived. It's not that great.
Yeah, I suppose where you're just trying to complete this 10 mana card and then benefit, I guess, or profit rather.
Well, and
Yeah.
then cycle your Jade Idols back back into your library and create this unwinnable late game. Like, that's the thing. We're at the control metagame, but as things tend to be, there's going to be a best control deck, and people are going to play that deck. And so we're here, guys. Welcome to the control meta. It consists of Druid.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, and I think that's it, right? So you have J Druid, and if you don't want to play control, congratulations, you have Token Druid. But if you want to win, like, if your main concern is winning, you're playing Druid in one form or another, right? Like, for the most part. I think Pirate Warrior is still showing reasonable numbers right now. But generally speaking, if you want to win, you should be playing Druid. And I think Zalay actually was recently talking about the fact that even though it's not really what he wants to be doing, he's only playing J Druid right now just to make sure he stays at the very top. He's like top 5 legend right now, just to make sure that he qualifies for Worlds. So it's not even a deck that he really wants to be playing. He wants to be experimenting, but he's like, I can't. I have to be playing J Druid to make sure that I get my spot at the World Championships.
Well, let me ask you guys this then, because Hearthstone is kind of unique in the sense that the way the tournament scene works is if Druid is as dominant as it is, and we have people focusing primarily on Druid, when it comes to the tournament scene, does everyone just ban Druid? And then what do the games look like?
The answer is yes. I haven't been watching, but I've been paying attention to some of the stuff from actually the European prelims playoffs, and actually Druid was banned in, I believe, almost 90% of matchups, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, and then how did...
in the North American prelims, I know it was a Druid deck was brought by every single competitor, which I think was actually the first time it had happened in a playoff series of any major Hearthstone event, if I'm not mistaken. That one class had 100% representation. So I will be honest, I'd have to look up the results. I don't know how things went after that point. I know there was some, like, Razakis Priest being played, and some other stuff. I can't recall off the top of my head. But yeah, Druid has more representation than any other class has ever had in the tournament scene, and is banned, I think, more than any other class ever has been. So I think that says something.
Most certainly, and go ahead. Sorry.
No, not a problem. Go ahead.
No, and I think that's kind of essentially what we're talking about, right? Like, what does your game look like if you're banning Druid 100% of the time? Well, that's effectively saying that the class doesn't exist. What does your metagame look like? And I think that it's not as bleak as as perhaps Justice initially might expect, but it's still not in a great place. Druid does serve an
and you are cutting out a little bit
in the metagame. The problem is that the way that Team 5, I think, designed the class. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think we're good.
That sounds better.
Okay. All right. So I think that part of the issue is that I think that the direction Team 5 wanted to take Druid, that they may have had a little bit of the blinders on and didn't quite understand the ramifications of some of the card effects that they were printing.
Which I think actually leads us pretty well into our next topic, right, Fitz? About the design there.
Yes. So what do you guys think about... Well, I think we kind of touched on it before, but I think we can kind of circle back around. Do you guys think I don't know, did they just make a mistake with Druid? Do you think that, I don't know, they underestimated the power of these cards, or was this kind of what they wanted, but perhaps they thought the other strategies would be able to, I don't know, keep it in check? Did they not play test enough? What do you guys think?
So I'll take a stab at that. I think what may have occurred is an issue that we've seen from them in the past, which is that they decide, hey, we want to push this cool new archetype, and so we're going to print cards that support that archetype. In this expansion, they realized that Taunt Warrior outside of the quest didn't really work the way that they wanted it to, and they actually came out and said that Warrior didn't really take advantage of it fully because they play with armor, so armor and taunts is kind of redundant, and they actually didn't make the most sense for the Warrior class. They wanted to try it for Druid instead. So they wanted to try a Taunt Druid deck, which is why they also printed a card like Strong Scale Scavengers, Battlecry, give your Taunt minions +2/+2. Bolster Bear or Bolster Bison, if you want to be more accurate. So they printed cards to help Taunt Druid, like Spreading Plague, like Crypt Lord. I think that they tested these things and, okay, so what does a Taunt Druid look like with these cards? Is it good enough for people to want to play this archetype? And they said, well, maybe not, but hey, let's put them out and let's see if they want to play Taunt Druid. And I feel like that's where the thinking was. And I think that historically they have shown that when they're trying to push something new, they fail to take into consideration, well, what if this just makes an existing archetype better? I don't know that they necessarily considered the ramifications of what happens when Spreading Plague goes in Jade Druid. What happens when it suddenly doesn't have to worry about the swarm of minions anymore, when going wide against Jade Druid isn't the answer. I feel like they didn't really consider that or didn't consider it enough. Which brings us to the question of, they do have a balanced team. In fact, they have multiple layers of balanced teams. They have the initial iteration and then the people that finalize this. They actually have two separate balanced teams. So the question is, what does their process look like? And that's not a question that I have the answer to since I don't work for Blizzard. But it is a reasonable question. Because again, this is not the first time that they've missed something like this, where they forget that cards can go into existing archetypes instead of only brand new ones. And I think that was a problem. Ultimate Infestation, I think, wasn't targeted at any one archetype. I think they just wanted to push the boundaries of, okay, what does a really good 10 mana spell look like? We have Pyroblast, obviously. We have Mind Control, and Mind Control only sees fringe play. Pyroblast sees a little more play. So they wanted to kind of push the boundaries of what can we do with a 10 mana spell. And as Owen said earlier, in any other class, this card would probably be pretty balanced, and maybe not even super played. So a lot of classes might think that it might even be a little bit too slow, depending on what they're trying to do. But when Druid can play it on turn 5 instead of turn 10, suddenly that card is very different. Because if you just look at Ultimate Infestation as, say, having a 5 or 6 mana cost, obviously then everyone's like, wow, that card is busted. And I think that Team 5 didn't really, they may have thought, okay, maybe you play a Wild Growth, maybe you innervate this on turn 7 or turn 8 to get a little bit ahead of your opponent. I don't think they thought about what happens when you go, Wild Growth into Jade Blossom, into Nourish for Crystals, into Innervate Ultimate Infestation. I think that they kind of failed to take that into consideration. So again, I think that they generally have a very specific idea of how they think certain cards will be played, and then forget to take into account that they can be played in other ways. In fairness to them, it's impossible to replicate what millions of players are going to do in a balanced team. They're always going to miss something, and that's understandable. But what really speaks to me, and I know I'm going on here, and I do want to let you guys get something into, but the main point here that I want to make too is I think why this was such a miss for them and why it's something they should have caught is look at some other powerful cards we've seen in the past. Look at Finja the Flying Star. You know how long it took the community to realize, wow, this card is actually pretty good in certain decks? Like, that card was just not played for a while after its release. And then suddenly we had things like Water Rogue coming out. We had it in other decks where suddenly people realized, hey, I can play a somewhat aggressive strategy. I can have a turn 5 where I just place a minion on the board, and then suddenly destroying one of their minions, summoning 2 more of mine, rushing them, suddenly sounds really good. And Finja turned out to be a very powerful card. It took a long time for people to realize that. The community realized how strong Jade Druid is with these cards almost instantaneously. Like, it took, a couple days, maybe, for the community to realize, holy crap, I have a late game deck that now doesn't die in the early game. So now it just beats everything. It was like a record amount of time. I don't personally recall seeing the top deck in the game get figured out that quickly in any other time. I mean, you guys can tell me if maybe you remember something that I don't. But I think this is a record for how quickly people realize just how busted this tier 1, top of tier 1 deck really is. And I think that's what shows that perhaps Team 5 needs to slightly reevaluate their own internal testing process, or at least the way that they're looking at cards as they're designing them. Rant over.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in making a couple of homemade card games, it's really hard to kind of determine how something is going to be used. I think maybe what they were trying to go for is to perhaps I don't think that they didn't realize that you could just play all ramp and ultimate infestation. I think maybe they made what's it called? What's the defensive spell called again?
Spreading Plague?
Spreading Plague. I believe they made that as a kind of a defense against over like playing too much on the board. Like if you commit too much on the board, it's kind of a trap for that. Where I don't agree is that was the one kind of chink in their armor, and then they made something to remedy that chink. But Owen, what do you think about that?
Well, I think the first and foremost is that I definitely think that there isn't enough transparency in the way that Team 5 goes about their testing. I know that for instance, Magic the Gathering, the community is fairly aware on what the internal testing process looks like. And so when there are errors, at least the community isn't as upset. I mean, certainly Magic's had its issues as well in the recent past, but we at least know what their internal testing structure looks like, so that way, as a community, it helps us kind of figure out where it went wrong. With Team 5, we don't know what that looks like. It's completely kept in secret. And I understand for, that there are certain purposes for why you would want to keep it secretive, but I think that, perhaps it might be a size issue. Maybe they don't have enough people on the team. I do know that when it comes to designing a card game, if the internal testing figures out what the best deck is, that means that your set you're not creating enough complexity in your metagame. Because if 70 people figured it out in the course of 3 months, how long is it going to take the millions of people to figure it out who play this game every day? So that's certainly something that I would like to see from Team 5, is a little bit more transparency with how it is they go about their testing process. So that way, as a community, we can work together to try and improve upon that. Since everybody involved in this situation wants to see Hearthstone be the best game that it possibly can be. As far as the way that they approach the problem, how I think Team 5 approached the situation, how these cards came into being, I've kind of discussed this a little bit on my article previously, but basically I get the feeling that they definitely had the blinders on and they wanted to create a taunt Druid strategy, and I don't think that they necessarily took into account the ramifications of what those cards would do to other classes, as Justice had said. I think that by wanting to design a deck that curves out for turn 2 taunt, turn 3 taunt, turn 4 scavenger to boost them, it necessitates that you design taunt creatures that are not going to die in one turn or die to one card, because otherwise you're never going to be able to curve those together. In a lot of ways, taunt minions are among the most fragile minions in the game, as they always have to be targeted first for attacks, and often are the first to die for spells as well. So the very strategy of trying to curve taunt minions into one another into a big boost up to their stats kind of necessitates that you create minions that are very difficult to kill. And I think that definitely led into the problem that we're seeing now with Token Druid, in that previously the class didn't have super sticky minions to put on turn 2 and 3. So instead it kind of relied on just flooding the board with lots of bodies. Long gone are the days where we could go turn 2 Haunted Creeper. But by creating a 1/5 taunt for Druid of the Swarm to curve into a 1/6 taunt, now we have minions that are just incredibly difficult to remove for their mana cost, which means that it then increases the relative power level of all the mass pump spells that Druid has for the Token Druid strategy. And then the Spreading Plague card, I feel like, was created to create a strong pivot turn for that taunt strategy, because in order to maximize your boost, you want to fill up your board with taunt minions. Well, taunt minions are super fragile, as we've already discussed. And so how do we do that effectively without having a bunch of cards go into it? Well, Unleash the Hounds is a good template for that, they were probably thinking. What if it summons a bunch of taunts? I think that had those taunt minions not been as big as they are, it probably wouldn't have been as big of an issue. But because they are 1/5s, and because, as we've kind of stated before, there's no easy way to clear all of that while preserving your own board, it really stops aggressive decks in their tracks. And I definitely feel that this is definitely a case where I feel like especially given that this kind of thing has happened to Blizzard before, that this really should be a wake-up call to them that their internal testing is not as extensive as it really should be. Whoever's reviewing these files before they get shipped off to development needs to, there needs to be another check in place, because clearly mistakes like this keep happening. They keep getting shipped through. And these are the kind of things that are going to drive people away from the game and drive them into other card games that are, that are in the same marketplace. Games like Eternal will pick up traction the worse that Hearthstone gets. And I think that this is definitely a situation where I hope it was a huge wake-up call to Team 5, that they really need to re-examine the way that they approach these sets. I think that one thing that definitely is a problem is that it seems like Team 5 is unwilling to go back over old design space. The desire to push a new archetype, it feels very Yu-Gi-Oh, reminiscent of Yu-Gi-Oh, where instead of improving upon old stuff, we're gonna ship out the next new big thing to try and get you excited, without ever looking back to see if the context of other cards have changed. And the community is going to do that, and they're going to try and break old strategies. And so I would love to have seen more exploration with hand buffing for Paladin, more exploration. I mean, we got some demon stuff for Warlock, which was great, but there's other strategies that are going on as well. What about some more 5-attack matters from Druid? There are definitely other things that they could have done to explore old design space before pushing into new territory. And I think that their willingness to kind of burn through that without checking out all the nooks and crannies available will lead to running out of stuff eventually. It took years for Magic to realize that they need to be more careful with how it is that they utilize their mechanics, and I think that Hearthstone's going to very quickly run into that problem if they continue to just push a new archetype every set.
Yeah,
I see what you're saying.
I do want to point out real quick, just going back to your Unleash the Hounds comparison. Can we just talk about how much better Spreading Plague is than Unleash? But B, the funny part is that Starving Buzzard, which was nerfed a long time ago, was nerfed because of its interaction with Unleash the Hounds. And Blizzard at that time said because it too heavily punishes your opponent for just playing minions, basically just playing the game. And that was why they nerfed Starving Buzzard. And so now we have Spreading Plague, which is in a different way, but exactly the same thing. It punishes in a different way, but it's exactly the same issue.
And one thing that I also wanted to touch on, which Justice had mentioned a little bit earlier, was how quickly the best deck was discovered. This is also a situation where Druid was already the most heavily represented class in the metagame during the Ungoro. It didn't have the highest win percentage. That distinction went to Murloc Paladin, but it was already the most heavily represented at around 23% of the meta, which is still a lot. That's a huge difference between the next highest class, which I think was hovering around 10. And so we have a situation where they made a huge, I don't want to call it a mistake, because I don't believe that you can make that a design mistake, but I feel that there's definitely a developmental mistake here. And it's, unfortunately it's slotted into the deck that was already the most heavily represented. Now all we did was we took a deck that was already the most heavily represented and then made it also have the highest win percentage, which of course is going to increase its win percentage even further, or its representation even further. So I think that this has definitely been a perfect storm for Team 5, and I think that this definitely feeds into why it is that the reaction from them has been so swift. Here we are a month into the new set, and we're getting an announcement from Ben via Twitter just today that something will be done about it within the week. So I think that that the speed at which they've been willing to say, all right, we messed up, we need to do something about this, I think is definitely indicative of how big of an issue it has become.
Well, speaking about that, what Ben put up, question on that: what is one prediction that you think might be the quote-unquote fix, and what do you what is one prediction that you think it would be, and what is what you would actually want it to be, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, sure. So I'll leave that off. Well, what I want it to be, I've already written about in one of my articles, which is that Innervate needs to go to Hall of Fame. It is past time for that to happen. Innervate is what gives Druid the ability to just do things that it shouldn't, quote unquote, shouldn't be able to do. It's what gives you turn 1 Vicious Fledgling in Token Druid. It's combined with ramp what lets Ultimate Infestation come out even earlier than it already is. It largely constricts design space because every Druid card that's ever printed, you have to ask yourself, okay, but what does this look like if it costs 2 less mana? And I think it's been hindering their design space. I think it was cool for a while in the game, and I think there was times where it wasn't as big a problem. I think as Druid has gotten more and more powerful tools, Innervate has become more and more of a problem. I know I'm not the only one that's talked about this. I know Raynad put out a video about Innervate needing to go to the Hall of Fame, which I saw after I wrote my own article about a few cards that I felt should be rotated. But it's certainly not an unpopular opinion, but it is my personal opinion about one of the things that needs to be done. Does that immediately kill Jade Druid? No, but I'm also not looking to immediately destroy the deck entirely. I think that just trimming its power a little bit so that it can still be played, I don't think the deck should cease to exist next week. But I think that it should be returning a little bit to its roots of it does very well in certain matchups and has weaknesses in others. And I think that Innervate does something about that. Now, of course, what I think they will do is not that, because they have shown that they generally rotate cards to the Hall of Fame in bunches and at predetermined times, so I don't think that's going to be their solution. I know one proposed solution, which I expect they've probably considered, is on Spreading Plague, lowering the taunts to 1/4s instead of 1/5s. So to me, that sounds like a reasonable thing for them to do. It is a bit easier to get past 4 health than it is 5 health, whether you look at things like Flame Strike or the abundance of 4 attack minions that we have, in the game that are available, or even just two attack minions can take out one of the tokens instead of needing that plus something else. So I think perhaps nerfing the Spreading Plague tokens to 1/4s instead of 1/5s might be a way that they decide to go.
All right, Owen, what do you think? One prediction and one of what you actually want them to do.
So, prediction for what I think they'll do. I think that there's been a lot of complaints about Ultimate Infestation, and I think that's probably going to be on their hit list. I honestly believe that they're probably going to address the 3 main cards that came out of Knights that slotted into Jade Druid. That is, and I think that it's unlikely that Token Druid's going to see a hit from this. I don't think that Druid of the Swarm or
Cryptlord
are going to necessarily see nerfs. Or at least if they do nerf the Scarabs that come off of Spreading Plague, that they're going to nerf Malfurion and the Druid of the Swarm as well. Okay. Because I don't think I think that they like that the 1/5 was the same all the way across, and I don't think that they would they would change just one without changing the others.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I think that they're going to possibly look at Ultimate Infestation and make a change there, as well as changes to Spreading Plague. I think that the go-to thing for Spreading Plague would be maybe to increase its mana cost from 5 to maybe 7 or something. I think I guess it would have to be 7 or something. Would be maybe where it would be fairly costed. So, for what I think they're going to do, I think they're going to definitely hit the 3 main cards of Malfurion, Spreading Plague, and Ultimate Infestation. I am expecting to see maybe some of the numbers in Ultimate Infestation come down. I don't think that just reducing 1 health off of those Scarab taunts, though, is going to be enough to change Spreading Plague, significantly enough to change the way that the aggressive matchup looks. And so I hope that that's not the change that they make, because I don't think that will be enough. And the thing is with these changes is that they're kind of emergency changes, and they don't want to be the people who have to come back in a month and a half and then nerf it again because they weren't, heavy-handed enough with the problem. So I think in this situation, it's more likely that they're going to over-nerf the cards and really hurt them, rather than make a small alteration and then risk the deck still being problematic in the future. So it's my prediction that they're going to come in with some heavy-handed nerfing, and I would expect, I wouldn't be surprised if some of these cards turn from widely played into borderline unplayable, based on the possible downside of the deck actually remaining as still very powerful even after slight nerfs. I think that the risk of what that looks like from a PR side is high enough that they would rather kill the deck today than risk having to address the problem again in the future, and then looking even more incompetent than they already do.
So with that in mind, what is it that you would do if you were on the design team?
Raise the mana cost of Ultimate Infestation by 1. I think that's fair.
I don't think so. I don't think that's enough.
Oh, Owen.
To be honest,
I need you to look above your head because that's where the joke just went.
So, what would you do if you were on the design team?
Well, if I was on the design team, I would definitely advocate for some serious nerfing going on here. I would almost assuredly reduce the size of the taunts from spreading plague and or increase the mana cost. I think that 1/4 is certainly reasonable, but I would probably do that in conjunction with raising the mana cost of the card to like something significant, because I think that it's at 5 mana, it's too trivial for Druid to do. I think at 7 or 8 mana, the effect is probably a little bit more understandable. So maybe I would do an increase in mana cost in conjunction with the reduction in the toughness.
Are you saying
alongside?
Are you saying a double nerf to reduce the health on the minions and to increase the mana cost?
Yes, a double nerf on that card, because again, I think the possibility of missing on doing only one of them hurts the game too much. So that's what I would probably do for Spreading Plague. For Ultimate Infestation, I'd probably reduce the card draw. I would probably reduce some of the statistics on that card. Maybe make it line up to 4/4/4/4 instead of 5/5/5.
Right.
That way it keeps it nice and symmetrical, because that's part of the design aesthetic that they were going for. And I think that at that point, it's one less card, one less armor, the creature is one less power, and you're dealing one less damage. That's a significant nerf, but the card's still powerful. And I think part of the reason that Ultimate Infestation even came about is that I definitely feel like it was some sort of stress test to see what they can do for a 10 mana spell. I just think that this was maybe the wrong class for it. So I would again expect a nerf in that way, I would want a nerf in that way. So a small nerf for Ultimate Infestation, a double nerf for Spreading Plague, and then a nerf for Malfurion and Druid of the Swarm to line up with the health changes that I would want from Scarab, from the Spreading Plague rather.
Got it. All right, so moving on, you guys. As of right now, what decks are you playing on Standard? Like, what's your favorite deck to play right now, despite Druid running around everywhere, and why is that? Let's start with you, Justice.
So I've been enjoying a few. I will say I did jump on the Murloc Paladin train. It's a deck that I actually played with a lot of success last season, and it's a lot of fun for me. I actually early on went with a list. I think it was from Just Saying. I can't remember for sure, but I believe it was from him. It's actually a very interesting list because it doesn't even use Finja, which most of them do. It basically looks it looks to have a stronger mid game, so it doesn't use Grimscale Chum. It sacrifices that 1-drop, but uses things like Righteous Protector, and of course Murloc Tidecrawler is your 1-drop as well. It has a really nice 4 spot with Corpse Taker, so more often than not you can get a 4-mana 3/3 Divine Shield taunt, which is really strong, and can do a lot of work, and curves out into like Bone Mare on turn 7, and then you have like Tyrion and possibly Lich King on turn 8. So it actually has a very strong mid and late game, and can present the kind of things that Druid does struggle to deal with. Spike Ridge Deed on something or Bone Mare on something. Basically now against Druid, since you can't really since you can't really go wide with little things against them anymore, you basically need to have one big thing, because that's basically the only thing left that Druid doesn't easily deal with. So you basically need to create that one big thing that they can't really get past. So like things like Spike Ridge Deed and Bone Mare really help out with that. So I've really been enjoying that. On the still Paladin page, Kibler's Hand Buff Paladin is better than you might think. I will say that I haven't gotten a Prince Keleseth yet, so I'm not playing the deck at full optimization. And by the way, how about the fact that 2 out of 3 Princes actually see play, Keleseth in the 4-drop one, sees plays in like Rogue and whatnot. So the meme cards people thought from before the expansion hit are actually playable. So who knew? So that deck is a lot of fun as well. I have played some Rizaka's Priest. I've had kind of mixed results with it. The deck is definitely good. It's just if you don't draw the right answers early, because again it is a Highlander deck, and you don't draw Raza, sometimes the deck just kind of flounders around for a while doing a whole lot of nothing. And those games don't really feel very good, but the games where you can Raza on 5, where you get your Shadow Reaper Anduin, where you get enough removal and then you can just kind of go off and machine gun things forever, is pretty neat. So that deck is a lot of fun. So those are the ones I've been playing around with the most. I've been playing a little bit of Control Mage with Frostwitch Jaina. And that deck, in the absence of Jade Druid, deck's actually pretty strong. Like Frostwitch Jaina, people don't realize, that card is actually really good. The card is really, really good. But you just kind of straight lose to Jade Druid with that deck. So it's sometimes it's hard to realize like how good Frostwitch Jaina is. So in a world without Jade Druid,
a ton of life.
Yeah, I mean, it's nuts. I mean, you can just do a lot of fun things with the deck, whether you're doing things like Baron Geddon, clear your board, heal for 20, or just the fact that anytime you kill him with pain, you get a 3/6 lifesteal with freeze is still really, very powerful effect. You don't need to run I mean, some people have tried like full elemental mage. It's not the route that I've been going. Just going more control mage with, good endgame. Because you don't need to run a lot of elementals. Basically, I'd have to pull up my list, but I believe I'm basically just running like Pyros and Baron Geddon as my elementals, and water elementals, of course, are in the main deck as well as from her hero power. And it's really all you need to still be able to take a lot of it, take advantage pretty well of Frostwitch Jaina's ability. So the deck actually has some pretty decent matchups. It's not, if Jade Druid were gone, this deck would beat everything, but it would have a decent enough matchup spread that it would at least be worth playing around with. It's just, I get crushed by Druid enough that like it kind of turned me off from it a little bit. But I like the deck a lot. I think it's a lot of fun. So those are the ones that I've either had fun with or had a reasonable amount of success with. Murloc Paladin's definitely been the best one so far.
All right. Oh, and what are you playing nowadays?
Well, mostly I've been playing Arena. Does that count? I've kind of been trying to dodge the ladder just because it's really disheartening to lose to Druid over and over again. When I do play ladder, I've been playing Druid because I like winning. So I know, go figure, right?
Winning is good.
Other than that, I do like losing with Quest Mage from time to time. That's pretty fun.
So what are you just playing? Just a regular ramp Druid into?
Yeah, like actual Jade Druid. I have been also playing quite a bit with Big Priest, the Big Easy, and that's been fun for some shenanigans. But I've kind of been bouncing around a little bit. Some Murloc Paladin I've definitely gotten in there, as well as Control Paladin, which has been fun. So, but for the most part, I've been just playing Arena since I think that the playing on the ladder, especially with the nerf on the horizon for the main deck to beat, I don't see a lot of value in it right now. So for now, I'm just kind of hanging back.
Can I ask you a Control Paladin strategy question?
Sure.
So if your goal is to ladder, if you queue up with Control Paladin and your opponent turn 1 Jade idles, is it a better strategy to hit the concede button and attempt to find another matchup, or to try to play it out?
Oh man, I think you can play it out. Especially if you're playing the Beardo OTK version, you definitely have a shot of winning that game. I think if you don't play Beardo, God, that's like you're like maybe like 15% to win. Like, it's really bad. I mean, there's like a not zero chance you can win that game. But like the number of things that have to go right, because again, like you're the aggressor of that game, so you have to be the one presenting the threats that they have to answer. Because Druid still has a hard time with that. But if you have just like a very reactive hand, you could very easily just flounder and die. If you don't have the Beardo OTK in your deck, then you don't really have an effective avenue to kill them before they overwhelm you with a giant army of Jade monstrosities.
Yes.
So I think it's really list dependent. The Beardo OTK, I think, is the list that's most effective against Jade Druid, but I don't know that's the most effective list there is, period. So, like, the thing is that, like, Jade Druid is so popular that even just smashing the concede button and trying to queue up again, you're more than likely going to end up against another Druid, so that should also inform your decision.
So first concede, then change it to the Beardo version so you at least have a chance, and then re-queue.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. Got it, thank you.
Okay, so before we wrap things up, do you guys have any other final points you wanted to touch on? Anything else?
Yeah, have we
Jade Druid?
talked about Druid yet today?
I mean, I did have one thing I want to mention. Bone Mare is the truth.
That card is so
Bone
good.
Mare, that card is stupid.
Okay, no,
Like,
here.
no, but that's the thing, is that, like, I think that a lot of people are focusing on Jade Druid right now, but I think as soon as that thing gets hit with the ban hammer, we're gonna start seeing people complain about Bone Mare, because that is a card that is very aggressively statted, I think, to say the least.
Yes.
I mean, it really is, because if you look at what was it? I had a comparison the other day of, I remember if I compared it, like, Blessing of Kings is like 4 mana for like 4/4, right? So if you say like 5/5 is worth 5 stats of mana, you know, Blessing of Kings is 4 mana 4/4. So let's say 5/5 is 5 mana, just by transitive property. That means you're getting a 2 mana 5/5 minion on top of your +5/+5 spell, but then you also have Taunt. So Taunt is generally worth 1 mana. So now it's a 6 mana spell. The +5/+5 in Taunt should be a 6 mana spell. So you're getting a 1 mana 5/5 minion. With
Yeah, I
with
mean,
your
like,
6
that
mana spell.
doesn't.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
like,
not a
that doesn't
perfect analysis, but like it's kind of what it comes down to. Obviously you need to have something on the board to buff. But the card is very good. The card is very good. It's basically the point that I'm trying to make. Here's my hypothetical. Is part of the reason Bone Mare is so good right now is because we are in a meta where sometimes things are slower because we're dealing with Jade Druid so much. And if Jade Druid goes away, if the meta speeds up, is Bone Mare as good?
No. I don't think the card is good because of the slow meta. I think the card's good because in decks that are slower, it provides you an avenue to stop aggressive decks, which allows you to survive longer.
Unless you're dead.
I think
7.
Yeah, of course you can die.
I'm just
But what I'm saying is that, like, for slower decks, or even, like, the thing is, like, for slow decks, it provides you a way to, kind of survive a little bit longer, and for, like, mid-range decks, it provides you a way to go over the top of aggressive decks, by just, like, protecting your minions and allowing them to, kind of press more damage. So I think that the card's really powerful in a vacuum. And, like, yeah, the fact that Druid has a hard time dealing with fat minions is a thing, but I think even if that were the case, we would still see Bone Mare. It would still see play as the top end of, like, mid-range and aggressive decks, and it's definitely something that it's a card that's really powerful, basically.
No, it is, and I agree with your point. I could see them topping out at 7, with 1 or 2 Bone Mares. I could see it.
I think you guys are overthinking it. It's good because for the same reason stuff like Defender of Argus was good. Like, it's just a body on top of a spell, basically.
Mm-hmm.
It's good for defending. It's good for being aggressive. It's just good. And
I would say that, right, at least in the current meta, Bone Mare is significantly better than Defender of Argus. In that Argus is seeing almost no play, and Bone Mare is in everything.
It is better, but I'm saying it's good for the same reasons
right.
Argus was good, in the past.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not. It has very little to do with the stat economy, and has more to do with the fact that it's a fast move that protects you.
Yeah, well, and the fact that also on the turn that you play it, you can generally also trade up while still having a decent body left over.
Yeah.
Yeah, or 2 decent bodies left over, I should say. So yeah.
Most likely.
Definitely great. So Bone Mare MVP. Yeah, got it. All right.
Yeah, that's good. All right, guys. Let's call it a night. I did want to really quick just say, so this is going to be up on the YouTube channel, right? The Justice channel.
Yeah, on the Judgment Gaming channel.
Judgment Gaming, rather. Okay. Very nice. So it should be like, I don't know, 1 or 2 days that we can actually get that up.
Tomorrow or Tuesday at the latest.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, great.
And then also, what happened?
I was just saying, yeah, great.
Oh, it is great. It is excellent, as Shao Kahn would say. But also, you can go to jdgjustice.com. There's going to be articles.
jdggaming.com. Thanks, bud.
Right, that's what I said.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I said.
Right, exactly.
I don't know why I'm always saying justice for whatever reason. Because
I'll take the
justice.
compliment. That's okay. You know, you just think about me a lot. I appreciate that.
Well, I was thinking more of light and L.
That's fine.
Because they're both justice.
That's fine too. Yeah. Well, I mean, they both believe they are anyway. One of them might be incorrect, but that's a discussion for another time.
Okay, so jdggaming.com. There's going to be articles, videos, and editorials, and which both Justice and Owen writes for. So please check that out. Have a good Labor Day. Don't get beat up out there. Eat a lot, and we'll see you guys later.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Next time.